I was first asked to speak, but I asked how long, and they said 15 minutes, and I went, oh gosh. And then as Robin mentioned, I have a theater arts degree, and I work with lawyers all day, so I could talk forever. However, I'm going to take a different tactic. Be naive, be concerned, be aware, be assertive, be considerate, be inquisitive, be persistent, be lucky. I thought about the students who I've interviewed over the last 6 years for the Pullman Scholarship via the phone, where if you've been on the receiving end of that, we only receive your name and your phone number and your email. We know nothing about you. And the reason is to elicit information about you and to see if you can think on your feet. And for us, it's rewarding because we find out snippets of people because they have to do something spontaneous. It can't be canned. And I was, over the years, just tremendously impressed with the tenacity, with the commitment, the fortitude of a Pullman Scholarship candidate, your awareness of the world, be it near and far, your understanding of pressure, and your goals are something that I didn't have at your age. And let me explain why. I spent my baby years in Pilsen. A portion of my elementary school years were spent in Lawndale. And then my dad decided to make the big move to the suburbs, and we moved to Argo, Illinois. If any of you are familiar with that, you straddle one foot on Harlem Avenue and you're in Argo. You straddle the other foot and you're in Chicago. That's as far away from the city as you felt comfortable moving. My immediate world was my immediate family. My Catholic church, which still had masses in Latin, and literally only the friends on my block. At that time, you didn't talk to people you didn't know. But I was a little bit different. Everybody was a potential friend that I just hadn't met. Persistent me convinced myself that I could go to college, despite being from a single-parent home at that time with a mother who had not finished high school. My guidance counselor told me about the Pullman Scholarship and suggested I apply. Needless to say, I was successful in that task, and then I had to go to college and finish. Unfortunately, that would be a family war that would be waged for the next 30 years. My family just didn't understand the purpose of a college education. Outside my increasingly less comfortable home environment, 3 events in 1968 would begin to shape my future direction without me realizing it. Martin Luther King, the Black Panthers, and the Chicago Democratic Convention. Starting in April with Dr. King's death, my view of the world began to change. The Chicago riots held everyone in our city in check. Just to share a tidbit, the riots resulted in over 125 fires and 210 buildings were damaged. There was no official death count, but it was reported that 9 to 11 people died and over 2,000 people were arrested, while at least 1,000 people were left homeless. You can still see the vacant lots in certain parts of the city where it was bulldozed and never rebuilt. And there were rumors that said that the riots had been organized by this group called the Black Panthers. By summer in the Democratic Convention, things were continuing to spiral. My cousin and I went downtown to see the excitement, having told our parents we were going to Fort City to go shopping. Needless to say, I had to stand in front of the TV that night, fearful that anybody in the news media had caught a picture of me walking with the demonstrators. Later, I was to find out from my beloved nephew that I was captured in some fashion because he was applying for ops in the United States Marine Corps, and my name popped up with an FBI report. It's one of my greatest prides. My personal sadness about not being at the Olympics was overshadowed by Tommy Smith and John Carlos showing a different America when the two black athletes raised their fist in a Black Power salute. And when the Black Panthers came to my high school that fall to recruit members, I saw firsthand that there was still, and I couldn't comprehend completely, the anger that affected our neighborhood. I met a man that day who would re-enter my life many years later. Fast forward 5 years later, I sat at my college commencement, grateful to have attended the same school that Jane Addams did, convinced that I could accomplish anything. While in college, Title IX was introduced, and I was recruited to play volleyball, a lot easier to put together than a swimming team. And I had a second encounter with the Black Panthers when our forum series at Rockford College invited them to discuss the impact the organization had on society. And I had my second encounter with that same man. Naive me, I had a job working for my alma mater in admissions for a year, not realizing that we were in a recession. Was set to go to graduate school the next year to get an MFA in theater. My enrollment had been deferred for a year because of the recession. Stipends had been cut. And my mother was unhappy that I was graduating without a teaching certificate because women just didn't do anything but teach or become nurses. Having relinquished that option to obtain a newly created BFA in theater, I had to take 18 hours both the fall semester and spring semester, and was also an RA to pay my room and board, so they wouldn't let me do student teaching. It was my commencement speaker who became the greatest gift of my college education. This very erudite woman stood before all of us and announced that she was proud to speak at a school that the John Birch Society, you guys are going to have to Google this, had approved, but prouder still that the school had moved forward faster than America to understand the changing complexion of our country. We're celebrating her 100th birthday this year, Gwendolyn Brooks. Fast forward again 10 years, I'm married, have one son, and still working in admissions, the job that I took at graduation. I am almost finished with my master's degree in higher ed, a change in direction, when I quit my job over a conflict that I had with the president of the college I was working at. Lucky me, my advisor for my master's program was able to secure a graduate assistantship, amazing how that came back, and even more fortunate that the director of admissions at Loyola University Chicago was aware of my circumstances and me. He called me because the law school was going to hire an official director of admissions, a real professional, Pam, and they have a new dean that he thinks is somebody I could work with, and it would allow me to stay at Loyola and finish my PhD. 30 years later, I stand before you. I'm still at Loyola, now a dean of admission. The dean who hired me was one of the first 6 women deans hired in the United States. She is my dearest friend and greatest mentor, and my life has come full circle. While I never received the formal degree, my 2 sons are the reason I have a PhD, the parents' highest dream. They both have their master's degree and are pursuing careers in areas they love, and more importantly to me, their friends have made it a point to share with my husband and I how they are the most compassionate and considerate and caring people they know. As I prepared for this speech, I reflected on 1968 and my continued connection to Dr. King, the Black Panthers, and the Chicago Democratic Convention. Here's why. On March 22nd, I had the greatest pleasure and visited a museum. And I spent an afternoon, and I'm going to tear this, at the African American Museum. If you have not visited, you may have to wait a while because seriously, the tickets sell out and they're free in less than 45 minutes, faster than Beyonce. And I'm so proud of that. They've already had close to 2.7 million people go through the museum, and it was my greatest pleasure to sit on the lawn of the Washington Monument the day it was inaugurated and hear Representative Lewis and hear President Obama talk about the dream being fulfilled. Let me share with you 2 people who did live their best life. When law enforcement officials in Selma, Alabama let loose with water cannons and released police dogs into a crowd of civil rights demonstrators in 1965, Norman C. Amaker was among the harried few staff attorneys dispatched by the NAACP Legal Defense Fund to represent those injured and arrested. 2 years prior, when the group of civil rights lawyers numbered perhaps 35, he and the others faced the daunting task of advocating some 10,000 or more demonstrators arrested through the South. When Dr. King drafted his letter from the Birmingham jail, the same year, it was Norman Amaker who took it from him, carried it out of the jail, and placed it in a manuscript into the hands of a waiting printer. He had been hired into the Legal Defense Fund by the soon-to-be U.S. Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, and in his 10 years with the group, Mr. Amaker argued or had a hand in the number of cases that ultimately would decide before the nation's highest court. He had a front row seat to many of the events of our civil rights movement, and in every case was intimately familiar with the personalities and the legal issues interweaving them. I was proud to have him as my professional colleague at the law school, where he taught until his passing in 2000. My greatest joy was seeing his name captured at the Birmingham jail's display within the museum. The second person is that elusive Black Panther that I talked about. In 2005, on a plane trip back from Washington, D.C., I had the pleasure to sit on the plane with, as they walked on board, Senator Durbin, Representative Rahm Emanuel, Mike Quigley, Danny Davis, and Bobby Rush. Assertive me walked right over to him and said, "You won't remember me, but in 1968, you tried to recruit my friends at my high school. In 1974, you came to my college to talk about the impact the Black Panthers had on them." And he turned to me and said, "In 1968 is when we created the Black Panthers. And in 1974 is when I left them, because we had turned into thugs." He and I chatted for 90 minutes on that plane, and I now call him my friend. So it was remarkable to me that I then walked into the museum and there's a whole display on Black Panthers. And the story that I think is so great is there were two young ladies there who couldn't have been more than 16 years old, who looked at each other and said, "I don't know what it is about these guys. What's the big deal?" And there were two women from Indiana who had been standing next to me that were my age. We looked at each other and said, "History lesson." And we made them go through the rest of the museum with us as we told them everything from a first-hand basis. And at the end of it, we hugged each other and said, "We are so grateful to have lived during that time." Have I lived the best life? I think so. I have great memories of Norm, of meeting Justice Ginsburg, of my child having the pleasure of playing basketball in the highest court in the land. The basketball court is above the Supreme Court, is above the Supreme Court, and that's where they play. I ran into Valerie Jarrett in an airport bathroom, and we talked for 25 minutes until her security team came in and wondered where she had been disappeared to. I get to admit people to a law school that will eventually change people's lives. I admitted Tom Dart, our Cook County Sheriff. I admitted Lisa Madigan, our Attorney General. And I admitted two people who are running DCFS. So I'm very proud of my accomplishments. And I help with the Pullman, which helps create new people in a new generation. In closing, I share with you my three best professional advices for an ideal life. In meetings, we are all equal. When we enter, our rank is left at the door. That's the way you have an honest conversation. Try to view all opinions from the point of the view of the person saying it. Try to think about where they're coming from to make sure that you understand why they're saying what they're saying, and be true to yourself. My personal advice, find a passion and adhere to it like it's your child. Don't think you will ever change the world, just change the world around you. And don't ever give up. It may take a while, but you'll get what you want. So be naive, be concerned, be aware, be assertive, be considerate, be inquisitive, be persistent, and be lucky. Thank you.